Welcome, everyone, to Demo Days, the show where we ask vendors tough questions while they demo their products for us. I am your host, Steve Taylor, and as you can see behind me, it's chaos. We move tomorrow. I'm so excited. The new house is done. We closed yesterday. I started installing all my smart stuff, and yeah, it's happening. So there are boxes everywhere. There wasn't even anywhere for me to like hide these because there's just boxes on top of boxes everywhere. So you just have to deal with it. But today I am joined by Corey and Paul from Lumu. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
I'm glad. All right. So I just want to dive right in because I know you two have kind of a lot. You've got a big product, and we only have an hour to go through it. So, Paul, you wanna give us an idea of what is Lumu?
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the time here. So I'm Paul Hutchberg. I'm the director of sales at Lumu. Joined Lumu in February. Prior to that, spent 14 years at ConnectWise. So been in the channel for a long period of time and understand working with MSPs that they're looking to make money, save time, mitigate risk. And I think Lumu does a lot of that. So I'm just going to go through a quick kind of 5 or 10 minute introduction on where Lumu started, who we are, what we do, where we're providing value to MSPs, and then I'll transition it over to Corey, who will go through a demonstration of the Lumu product. So for those of you that support, larger organizations, mid-size enterprise, we do have the product validation from, Frost and Sullivan, Forrester. We're in what's called the NDR, Network Detection and Response category. We're also a Gartner leader as well. I know many MSPs don't care about that stuff, but for those of you who do care, we do have those validations.
How do you guys do on channel program?
So we have not joined yet, but that is something that I absolutely want to do.
I know. I wanted to give you a hard time.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It is on my budget to-do list here, and so which is why we're chatting, and certainly something that I want to do ASAP. So I appreciate the call out there. So Lumu started about 5 years ago, primarily in the enterprise market, hence those validations there. And then our CEO and team, quickly saw the opportunity within the MSP market, and a couple of years, transitioned the product more to be a fit for the MSP team, that multi-tenancy, the integrations, to the MSP products. And so, we're nearing on about 100 MSPs using the Lumu product, which is, really great. And we're seeing a lot of interest within the MSP community. So, what is it? What does it do? What are we seeing today? So, talking to MSPs, there's the typical cybersecurity, we call it the triad, hey, I've got endpoint security, and it's either like SentinelOne, CrowdStrike, we'll leave that be, Bitdefender, EDR, things like that, right? At the firewall level, it could be, or SASE products, you got Fortinet, you've got Sophos, Meraki, and email security. But the reality is, the bad guys know that as well, and they're finding ways to bypass those tools, right? And so as we'll all agree that there's nothing out there that makes you 100% secure. And so where we really fit, my slide will go. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Is really that network's visibility, right? Is that endpoint security does a great job, with SentinelOne and CrowdStrike. Firewalls, do a great job, but really, are we drilling into the network? Are we really having that visibility? And I know a lot of people are thinking, well, that's why I have a SIM. Well, the issue with a SIM is that, it gives you excessive logs, alerts. You typically then have to hire a third-party SOC, which become cost prohibitive. So Lumu is that an alternative where we're doing automated threat detection and response, we're integrating with your existing stack. So we're integrating with the SentinelOnes, with the CrowdStrikes, with the Sophos, with the Meraki's, Fortinets, Sonics walls. We're integrating back into your PSA products, whether it's ConnectWise, Halo, Autotask, as well as email security. So Lumu in action, and what it's doing is not only we're integrating with your existing stack, but we're pulling in real-time metadata across DNS, NetFlows, firewalls, proxies, and email. We're putting that through our AI, which is the illumination process, and we're looking for different IOCs. And then our secret sauce is, because we're integrating back with your existing stack, we're triggering those automated response. And we're doing that in near real time, right? So, most SOCs out there, they're taking 20 to 30 minutes to analyze what's going on, and then they're sending that information back to the MSP. Whereas Lumu can take that action in near real time, saving an MSP, a tremendous amount of time. So the other thing, I'll touch on this real quick, and Corey and I saw this recently with an MSP where they had an IoT device that got in the network and created a lot of mayhem there. Lumu covers all the different devices, because we're focused on the network. So there could be potential blind spots in your existing cybersecurity stack, and Lumu can absolutely cover those. We are multi-tenant, and so you get that single view of all your clients and what's going on, which is extremely valuable for any MSP, opposed to going customer by customer. I just want a holistic view and what's going on. Corey will touch on that as well. We are easy to implement. I know there are a lot of products that take a ton of time to implement and deploy to your customers. Easy to set up for your customers. It certainly will absolutely multiply your team because of our automated response. It allows your technicians to focus on other areas within the business. It can potentially fill the gaps of your existing stack and certainly save time and resources. The net is, Lumu is a security analyst in a box. I like to compare it to when RMM started, right? Most MSPs were doing break fix, and then they turned into kind of managed services using an RMM product because it worked 24/7. They automated their service delivery. That's really what Lumu is, but for cybersecurity. So it's working 24/7. It's automating actions. And I've talked to MSPs that aren't 24/7, that they might wake up in the middle of the night and hope, look at their service board and hope there wasn't an alert that came through at 2 a.m. right? Whereas Lumu can be that 24/7. You don't necessarily have to outsource to a third-party SOC to provide that 24/7 support. We've got some great testimonials from MSPs. We just launched one with a company called Greenlight. The CEO, Jason, talked about how he was able to actually make money using Lumu, where he was able to differentiate himself in the marketplace by using an NDR product where a lot of MSPs are not, and win deals, which I thought was pretty cool. We have a very transparent pricing, and so we can do a pay-as-you-go. It's per endpoint per month, servers, workstations, and laptops, similar to kind of the RMM model, or you can do a yearly commit, and it's a tiered pricing model.
You made this really easy. The only thing I want to see now is how it works.
Yeah, good.
Sure.
I tried doing it quick. So, all right, Corey, all yours.
Sure. Thanks, guys. So I've been at Lumu for about a year and a half now. I'm dedicated as an engineer to the MSP space of our company. And prior to coming to Lumu, I worked for a Southern MSP with an annual revenue of about $20 million. So I've been in the background that, MSPs are. I've worked that career. I know what it's like. And so as a senior engineer, what they really wanted me doing was onboarding new customers or delivering new software or hardware projects to customers to keep me billable. But inevitably, what always happened is you get pulled off that project or whatever you're doing to go work IR in the case of a compromise or a suspected compromise. If our MSP had been using Lumu for the analysis and automated response, like the time-consuming tasks that I would have to do, kind of reviewing and analyzing, endpoint EDR logs or firewall security logs, kind of making some decisions based on all the data that I reviewed, and then actually manually implementing blocks and or coordinating, let's say we're using managed SOC, this would have been a huge time saver. So my goal today is to kind of reinforce how Lumu works, how fast it works, how efficient it works, because as Paul said, it's 24/7. It's like an analyst in the box. It never stops working. So it really does a phenomenal job with actual automated response in real time. So that's the goal. I'll walk you through an incident and sort of also kind of show you a little bit of evidence in both the incident I review with you today, in the deployment that I'll review with you for customers, and in the reporting that I show you how we kind of eliminate that alert fatigue with some of the things that I'll show you. Basically, we can effectively bundle multiple IOCs within a Lumu incident that are related. So you don't get indicators of compromise. Sorry. So when we see adversarial activity or attempts to reach out to the infrastructure, we actually can take one or more IOCs and we actually bundle it into a Lumu incident for review and summary. So without further ado, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and share my screen. You got it going. Yeah. I'll log in. This is a demo environment. We're SOC 2 Type 2, so this is not real customer data. But what I'm going to do today first is sort of go back and briefly talk about what Paul showed earlier in the slide, right? So we're in NDR. That means network detection and response. We need to collect network metadata. So before we do that, we have to create a customer, right? This portal is multi-tenant, as Paul stated. It supports MFA, it supports SSO, as you would expect. But when we actually need to create a customer, we do a couple of things. We create a customer, give it a name, right? So let's say it's Corey's company. And we have to assign endpoint licenses to the tenant. The way Lumu is actually sold in a paid subscription model is by endpoint. An endpoint is defined as anything that you can install our Lumu agent upon, which in this case is Windows, Windows servers, Linux, and Mac devices. So things like IP printers, IP cameras, IoT devices don't consume licenses, but Lumu is protecting the network which contains those devices. All networks contain those devices today. So once we've created a tenant, I'm going to go into this sample tenant city company. We need to collect that metadata. How do we do that? We have a variety of tools. Our deployment is super straightforward, fast and easy, and we have a very well-documented playbook, if you will, that can be found at our support site. This is freely open to the public. You don't have to register to gain access. It's docs.lumu.io. And I'm just going to highlight this article. This is basically the first steps for deploying Lumu. And it basically always involves deploying the endpoint agent first, because we can use the power of your RMM tools or Intune or wherever you use to deploy software to get that out to endpoint devices on the network. But we go beyond that. If we have AD environments, we can actually deploy what we call server collectors. Those go on Active Directory servers in the network running DNS. And the idea here is we can collect DNS metadata just like we do with the endpoint agent for devices like those IP cameras, IoT devices that can't actually have an agent installed upon them. If we're not in an AD environment, we can use something like our Lumu virtual appliance or our Lumu log forwarder software agent for Windows that can collect syslog metadata, which is another way to capture, network traffic beyond the endpoint that you'll be missing in modern networks where you have guest devices coming in and out of the network you don't manage, or you have IoT devices that you really don't know what they're doing because you don't have that visibility, kind of all tying back to the network detection. We can also utilize gateways, which are another way to capture DNS traffic holistically across the network. And then the last thing I'll talk about as I lead into integrations, Lumu integrations, is the practice of collecting email metadata. We know that so many of today's attacks are done by social engineering, email phishing, spear phishing. So we recognize the value and importance of being able to analyze metadata from emails that make it through that sort of triad that Paul showed you earlier, and that get into the user's inbox. Do we have, IP headers that are pointing to IOC infrastructure, something that's bad, or is there a URL in the email that takes you to something where you can download a payload? we're looking for that stuff to orchestrate automated response blocks. So with that, let me kind of talk about the different types of Lumu integrations. I mentioned briefly email metadata. That falls under data collection. So data collection are going to be integrations that tie into things like cloud infrastructure, DNS security tools, email suites like G Suite and 365, the things that MSPs just commonly use all the time. We target our integrations around what you, the customers, tell us you need and what we see in practice at MSPs. We also have response integrations. These are the integrations that orchestrate the blocks. This would fall into the category of an EDR. So you'll see many EDRs that you'll recognize here as I go up and down the list. Firewalls, and although they're not as popular as they once were in the past, web proxies. So again, the goal here is to integrate with the most common products seen in MSP space, and we add new integrations all the time. We actually added a new one about 10 minutes prior to this call that I requested 2 days ago. So the last integration type is SecOps. These are the integrations that we utilize to connect to your PSA. So if you want to, say, have a Lumu incident be turned into a ConnectWise ticket or a Halo ticket or an Autotask ticket that gets sent to your PSA, where you can actually add billable time, add notes, work the ticket through your PSA, close the ticket in the PSA, it closes the incident in Lumu. This also houses integrations like SIMs, so we can actually send our data to SIMs. We can receive data from SIMs to analyze, so we can do it both ways, as well as some of the kind of stranger integrations, but they're really valuable. So Teams and Slack. Slack is the new one that got introduced today. A lot of MSPs work, out in the field through Teams or Slack in channels. So these integrations actually post information and updates about incidents in those channels within Teams or Slack. So what I want to do now is go through an actual Lumu incident under the premise that we've set up metadata collection various ways. Again, endpoint agent DNS, could be AD environment DNS, could be syslog through virtual appliance or log forwarder. We can also do NetFlow through the virtual appliance, email metadata collection through the data collection integrations. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to set up these response integrations that do the blocks, right? So a firewall block could be block a URL, block an IP. That could also be included with certain EDRs, but EDRs are always going to have file hashes blocked for a payload if they're present in an incident, to make the EDR aware of that payload so it can stop that malicious process and prevent lateral spread across the network. And so that's kind of how the process works of NDR. If there aren't any questions, I'm going to go ahead and move on to reviewing an incident so I can kind of tie this all together.
Yes, please.
Yep, and help it make sense. Okay, so for this, I'm also going to pick city company. And I'm going to focus on an event that I reviewed yesterday preparing for this. Again, this is a demo environment, so someone at Lumu triggered this. But I've seen plenty of these in actual customer environments. So in this case, I'm going to focus on this incident to this URL as an example of Cobalt Strike. And in this case, basically, we can see that we had an endpoint named CTI Felipe reach out to this URL, and we noted that this is a bad place to go to because it contains a payload that represents Cobalt Strike. Obviously, what Cobalt Strike is trying to do is get a beacon agent on the endpoint to compromise the network and result in a CNC or command and control attack. So in this case, we see that the source that triggered the incident was an endpoint named CTI Felipe, and the logged in user was Lumu. This is a box running our Linux endpoint agent. With Windows agents, we actually also can show processes that are running. That could be a web browser, or it could even be like a host artifact that maybe got loaded onto the actual endpoint as part of this sort of process call out to the IOC. If we had gathered this data from syslog, it would show syslog. If we gathered it from our server collector, it would show you server collector. So you kind of know what metadata source that we installed in the customer environment was used to detect this IOC or these IOCs, as you'll see, which we compiled into an incident. So as we walk through sort of the SecOps motion, the first step is we're looking at, okay, what endpoint or endpoints reached out? When did they start reaching out in the highlights? What was the first contact? What's the last contact? How long has the incident been open? How long did it take Lumu to respond? We respond in milliseconds, not seconds, not minutes, milliseconds. We send what we need to send for the blocks very quickly, faster than any human can do. And this speaks to like the real-time blocking and just how efficient Lumu is versus processes that humans have to do. We just can't work that fast. We also give you some useful things like an attack distribution. Is it happening over time? Is it spreading in the network? And the compromise radar in a real incident. This is invaluable because you always assume the first contact probably has the chance of being compromised, right? The first endpoint could be something that we need to go do, a Sentinel-1 scan on or a CrowdStrike scan on just to make sure it's clean and we don't notice anything odd going on. But once Lumu has automated the response, if we still see contacts after that block time, which I'll show you in the operation timeline, then we still have an endpoint that's trying to reach out. The blocks are in place, so they can't, but we still have to do an IR. We still have to remediate that endpoint and make sure it's clean. So in this case, if we look at the operation timeline, which is present in all of the Lumu tabs working through SecOps, we can actually see that basically we orchestrated the blocks within seconds after the first contact. So if we saw in the operation timeline, if we saw a contact at 1500, we should not see that. That's a clear red flag of let's go check out maybe this endpoint here, CTI Felipe. We're also going to show you into the details. This is where we get into the meat of it. So these are the IOCs. You'll note here that we had 15 IOCs that we bundled into one Lumu incident. With a SIM, this would have been 15 alerts traditionally. So that kind of speaks to the alert fatigue. You'll also see that when you look at the statistics in a weekly or monthly report. When you aggregate the incidents in an organization over, let's say, a week or a month, you'll see how much less noise we generate the way we are able to bundle related IOCs together into an incident. In this case, it's Cobalt Strike family. I think everyone is familiar with Cobalt Strike. It's been a nuisance for a couple, 3 years now. Every time we think we kill it, it comes back. It contains a payload. So it's going to have file hashes that represent the malicious payload. And so what we're going to do in automated response is, let's say, for instance, we have a FortiGate firewall and Sentinel-1 is the EDR. We're going to pass back this URL to block on the FortiGate with our response integration to the FortiGate firewall. And through our API integration with Sentinel-1, we're going to pass Sentinel-1 back these 3 file hashes in its block list globally, so that now all your customers that you have set up Lumu with are going to be protected because Lumu has made Sentinel-1 aware of this payload. And sometimes it's aware and sometimes it's not always aware, right? So we give you additional context for the analyst. Let's say we go to VirusTotal and take a look at this. We can see that for this IOC, Lumu identifies it as malicious, as do several other security vendors. But we have a lot of security vendors that have missed this. I mean,
or maybe they haven't missed it. Maybe they assessed it further and found out it's okay.
That's a great point, because we all know not everyone gets it right all the time. And that is a great example of why we offer a couple of features in the product that are extremely useful if you have doubts, or maybe this is causing business continuity problems. Let's say that URL was a website that city company went to go buy widgets, and it buys its widgets every day. It's a product it drop ships for its customers, and they suddenly can't get to this site and it disrupts business. Couple of options. If we contact an expert, that goes to our threat intelligence security team with the specifics of this incident, and you can say, hey, this is the site. I need to get to because, this is where I buy my widgets. Tell me everything you know about this and, convince me that this is really a threat. That is a great course of action. I highly suggest customers do this. But another immediate thing they can do is we have an option to mute an incident. If we mute an incident in Lumu, it reverts all the blocks in real time related to this incident. So if I click mute here, that would remove the block at the FortiGate firewall and it will remove the file hashes from Sentinel-1. And basically we can, wait on our threat context to determine what we want to do. But that's a great question, Steve. So thank you for asking that and mentioning that. I have not seen a customer need to mute an incident for that case yet, but the feature is there because it is possible. So we thought of that and built that into the product because, as you said, what if we got it wrong this time and somebody else got it right? No vendor is 100% accurate. I would never state that we are. However, the way our elimination process works, we use so many more threat intelligence feeds than the average security vendor product. And our AI that we utilize to look at artifacts and things that maybe don't fit what's just cookie cutters, cut and dried in the threat intelligence feeds, allow us to be highly accurate, and I would dare state the most accurate in the industry. Okay. So if you don't mind, I'll get back to the related resources. Again, this is for the analyst that's trying to work the incident to closure. So if we're talking about Cobalt Strike, we're going to give the analyst lots of external articles to what is Cobalt Strike? How does it work? How do I get rid of it? And again, this goes back to, in this particular incident, we're going to be focused on this particular endpoint to make sure it's clean. We've blocked access to all other endpoints in the environment, and we've made all the endpoints aware of the payload, but we always, as a best practice, to check out this machine. Okay, finally, we map every incident to MITRE ATT&CK framework to show you the TTPs that an IOC attempts to use to get into the network, to move around laterally, to get what it needs to basically either cause damage in the network or exfiltrate data from the network. That does not mean that in this incident case that, Cobalt Strike worked. This is what it's trying to do to work successfully. Why is this important? I think it's powerful in a couple ways. Every incident is mapped to MITRE ATT&CK, and every incident within the customer portal, we have a global MITRE ATT&CK matrix. So we map all the attacks into one matrix that you can filter over time. Let's say last month, last quarter, last year. These TTPs do two really powerful things for MSPs. One, they sort of show, hey, if we're going to go ahead and do some baselining for what our security should look like, if we see something in here, for instance, PowerShell, that's a good call to maybe we should restrict PowerShell use to non-administrative users, or restrict PowerShell more exclusively than you might normally do for the types of attacks that it can cause.
That seems like cybersecurity hygiene now.
It definitely is.
And MSPs are all doing at least that much, right?
Yeah. Well, you would hope. You would hope. But think about this: when you come into an environment that you've taken over from another MSP or is going to an MSP, you want to kind of have a tool that lets you look at baselines in the network, because you don't know what you don't know when you first get in there until you've had a lot of time to kind of go through and do the onboarding. So this is useful during the process of onboarding to identify some of these things, just to check and confirm if you're not already doing it. But it also can be used, to me, as a selling tool. If we see a lot of phishing, spear phishing attacks going on in the network, and you are, interacting with your customer and you're seeing these types of attacks from Lumu, then it gives you an opportunity to come back to them and say, that phishing campaign software we talked about, that education tool we talked about we offer, that this is some evidence that we're seeing this in your network, and this would be a good time to really come back to the table and have that conversation. So it could be a sales tool, is the way I look at it. That's how I look at it. In any case, it is a reminder of me as an engineer to always check my bases, right? Did I do all of this? Did I lock it down the way I think it locked it down? And so I think MITRE ATT&CK is a great framework to kind of get familiar with if you're not familiar with, because it really can teach you a lot about cybersecurity. Absolutely. And that is kind of what an incident looks like. So again, what happened? We had an endpoint reach out to this URL. This URL, or actually these absolute URLs, contain this payload. And so what Lumu did in real time to both the firewall and EDR, we recognized this in milliseconds, passed the blocks back to the firewall in under a minute, as well as sent the file hashes back to Sentinel-1 to protect that customer environment. So that is what we mean when we say, cyber analyst in a box. It's working 24/7. It never takes breaks. And this is important for MSPs, because not all MSPs are 24/7. Not all MSPs have an in-house SOC team. Not all MSPs outsource their SOC services. It's all dependent on the MSP. We hear different scenarios and models every call we're on. And in any case, Lumu is a good fit. If you're using a SOC team internally, we're doing a lot of the things they would manually be doing. If you're using an outsourced SOC team, we're automating the blocks and things that they would do, but much faster. And we do blocks at firewalls that they likely do not do at all, or they'll pass it back as work to the actual engineers at the MSP. So there's really no scenario where Lumu is not a great fit as a part of your stack. Again, like I said, I go back to my last days at MSP. The things that Lumu would have done for me would have saved me an immense amount of time. It would have also bought me time if I was not, immediately available to work or do an incident review. It would have allowed me to have that endpoint get scanned by a help desk engineer, because if I reviewed the incident and I was working off site, I wouldn't have to drop everything to do that. So it saved me an immense amount of time, and it made me more billable. So it made me more valuable to my employer, because what they wanted me to do, again, was to be out in the field and build, because I was the highest paid or billable engineer that you could be at the company.
I gotta say, like, you guys covered everything in a really short amount of time. There are a lot of cybersecurity companies that are popping up right now, and there are a lot of, I'll call them all-in-one cybersecurity platforms out there that they're doing internally, the EDR and the spam filtering and all of that. It looks like you have the ability for us to install an agent, but you also work with all of these other platforms, so that way we can use what we believe is the best in breed in order to keep our clients protected. And you're ingesting all those logs, right?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We're product agnostic. We recognize the value that MSPs need to have relationships with the most popular tools in the industry, whether it's, EDR, CrowdStrike, Sentinel-1, Sophos, whatever it is they've determined to be best of breed. Same with firewalls. We don't want to be that all-in-one solution. That is, to me, as an engineer, that's restrictive. If as an engineer, I never want to put all my eggs in one basket. I like best of breed solutions. I'm from that time frame when that concept was introduced, and I'm still a firm believer in it. I believe that Lumu is part of that best of breed. It's another layer in your stack to gain visibility that you're missing without having an NDR tool in your stack. As Paul alluded to earlier, the Greenlight testimonial, they literally are seeing, a differentiator in their services and going to market with it because their competitors don't have this offering.
No, this is great. What how I don't remember if you covered this earlier or not. How quickly does Lumu like detect things and notify us? And have you found that um I guess I don't know the way to ask this correctly. Is this something that security vendors are competitive about?
So in our case, when we actually go with deployment, by the time we complete the endpoint agent rollout with RMM, That gives us enough visibility in the network. I would always recommend reviewing each customer and making sure we deploy for best practice. But we get enough visibility to begin to see and recognize and trigger incidents. When I'm on calls with a customer, as a best practice, when we're setting up, integrations for response, we trigger incidents to make sure those responses are working. And I'll typically see those show up in our portal within 5 to 10 seconds. And from that point, we go validate. Oh, the blocks are there at the firewall. Oh, the blocks are there at the EDR to make sure the integrations are working and set up properly. But we're literally that fast in detection, and similarly with response, if not faster. And I think this is something that security vendors talk about, right? I mean, Paul could speak to it a little bit as well. Like, I think if you're using, outsourced SOC, your response times are not going to be 1 minute. They're going to at least be 10 to 30, depending on the team. We hear different numbers from our customers and prospects all the time. I think I've heard as little as 10. I've heard as much as 30. Would you agree with that, Paul, or what do you think?
Yeah, usually, on average, from what I've heard, is like 20 to 30 minutes, right? It's human beings that are reviewing logs and, hey, is this actually malicious or is this a false positive? And then from there, most SOCs on the network side don't have access to the network. So they're not actually providing remediation, and they're sending it back to the MSP, and saying, hey, now it's your turn, right? And so that time adds up, whereas Lumu is near real time, it's triggering the block. And then Steve, to answer your other question, so, we are the only MSP NDR product that is agnostic to the tool set. There are some other vendors out there, Sophos, Blackpoint, for example, that have an NDR product, but my understanding is it requires their stack. So if you want to have, CrowdStrike or other solutions, their product, isn't going to work. And then we do find, MSPs when they're looking at our product that, we can potentially replace, the third-party SOC where they can bring it in-house, leveraging, our automation, or, we could potentially replace a SIM. Though we do integrate with SIMs as well, but we could potentially replace a SIM.
Cool.
And
And Steve, I just wanted to bring up really quick something I actually forgot to cover, if you'll bear with me for a minute. So Lumu offers both weekly and monthly reporting options for the customer tenants. This is an example of a weekly report. This is very beneficial, as I know I work really closely with my salesperson in the region, which I was deployed, which was basically in the Atlanta to Middle Georgia area. We would do monthly reviews of QBRs quarterly, and we would take, information from various sources and reports to compile that QBR for our customers. So, basically, is again an example of a weekly report. How much metadata we're analyzing, how many incidents we're detecting in a period of time, information about how many were resolved in that period of time, the time to respond. As we can see here, we talked about speed. We're about speed. But really, one thing I wanted to highlight here, which is to me is very powerful. If you look at the number of IOCs, almost 1,100 for this customer in, let's say, a period of a week, that resulted in 32 incidents, right? So that's grouping all those IOCs that are related into an incident versus getting 1,100 alerts from a SIM. We also calculate via formula how much work this saves to technicians across this number of incidents, and how much time it would take you to actually go and do the review that Paul and I have talked about, and then determine the appropriate action. So again, if you think about time savings, less alerting, efficiency, these are all things that are going to make your MSP more billable and actually more efficient, in my opinion.
And this is all great, but it seems like everyone has jumped on the machine learning and AI bandwagon. So I'm sure you can appreciate the skepticism that MSPs are going to have with, letting the computers take over, so to speak.
No, and I agree with you there. I was hesitant to jump on the bandwagon, but I am all in now. I just don't see our current methods of cybersecurity, IR, and response. They're not working, right? If they were working, We wouldn't hear about
we wouldn't
attacks.
have all these
Yeah.
breaches and
Yeah, I mean, so I think this is the future. It's the next generation. There'll always be a human component. I mean, there has to be a human component, but humans need tools to make them more efficient to do the job before, time drags on. And basically, when we have a compromise, we hear all the time where, attacker had been in the network for 3 months. We didn't know it, and they done all this damage, and they went undetected, and then it was a major, news break. Lumu can help prevent those types of activities from occurring because we look at a lot of things in a precursor state, and so we identify them before you get to the point where we've got a machine that's compromised in many, many cases. Not all, but many. But yeah, AI absolutely is a part of it. To your point, you see it more and more every day, but I'm a believer in it. I know there can be some negatives with AI. I read all the news like you do, and I hope my job is secure and all that sort of stuff as well. But there's always going to be a human element to cybersecurity, period. So, it just needs to be more efficient because
Sure.
there aren't enough of us out there to cover the need that exists at the moment. And it's a struggle. And these folks that are out there, they're expensive.
And what would you say to the people who think that companies like you are what's wrong with MSPs, where you're commoditizing cybersecurity, so to speak? You're making it so any idiot can do it, and you're going to enable more idiots in the MSP community.
I don't think we're enabling more idiots. I think we're enabling an MSP to do something that they struggle to do well. And that's because it's hard to find the talent. It's hard to retain the talent. If you want to build up, a world-class security team, it's going to be more than 1 or 2 people, right? But we have this sort of evolving issue where MSPs are being required to move into the MSP space, and they either have to figure out a plan to do that, whether it's outsourcing it using a tool like Lumu. Lumu makes more sense. And the idea is we're not making you idiots. We're helping you become experts by making the process simple and quick to do the IR. And that's exactly what I would tell any MSP because, I've been in those shoes doing that work. And it could be time consuming. Absolutely.
How does Lumu align with different compliance standards?
I'm glad you asked that. So I did bring up, we just released this week. Here's an example article that we have on our website on how we achieve CIS compliance. We hear that from customers a lot. I encourage you to get, if you're interested in Lumu, to get on a call with Paul and I. We have mappings to everything from CIS to NIST that we can share with you depending on, what your goals are and how you go through your compliance, what you guard as your, golden egg of compliance. But we are very familiar with this. We work with folks on compliance all the time, whether it's, privacy regulations for, the portal itself, or whether it's CIS, NIST, you name it, whatever your compliance tools are. We're well aware of this. The only thing we are not really currently certified for, full disclosure, is FedRAMP. I think that's something we will likely get into next year. But as you're aware, it's very complex. That's a very complex compliance.
It is, and kudos for saying that you think you're going to tackle it. Is FedRAMP, and I got out of MSP stuff before all of this really started taking off. So FedRAMP, is that kind of like the gateway drug to CMMC?
I'm not particularly familiar with that myself because I never worked in the federal government space, but from what I know about it, and Paul may know more, we are running across it a little more regularly with potential customers that's who they service is federal government entities. Paul, do you know how to answer that question that Steve asked?
No, I'll pass on that one.
Okay. Hey, at least we're transparent.
All good. Paul, can you put that pricing slide back up? I just want to
Yeah, you
want to
can.
let people see that one more time.
Sure.
I'll stop my screen.
No problem. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, if anyone has questions, feel free to ask them, and I'm going to give you the speak now or forever hold your peace. Because normally these go for an hour, but Corey and Paul did such a bang up job that we don't need the whole hour. So this is the pricing page. If you guys are interested in learning more about Lumu, I believe if you go to channel program, you can still search for Lumu because every vendor can have a free profile, right? So look up Lumu and see, what kind of reviews other MSPs are leaving. If you're using Lumu, then please leave a review. Let everyone know what you think about it. So yeah, those are my two recommendations there. The fact that we can get this month to month for 363 an agent, and I just want to clarify. So I saw, someone asked a question about what's considered an endpoint in the context of licensing, but like immediately after they asked that question, I saw it on the screen. So if we could just recap, basically a license is anything you can install an agent onto, right?
Correct, and that is currently a Windows workstation, Windows server, Linux, or Mac OS.
Okay. So we don't have to worry about firewalls and other network
Nope.
hardware taking licenses.
Correct.
Even though you support even making modifications to some of the equipment, it doesn't cost a license to do so.
Absolutely correct.
Okay. What other kinds of devices, like if you were to look in the crystal ball, and we're purely speculating now, like what other kinds of devices do you think we're going to have to start worrying about? Like, are we going to have to start worrying about the smart stove and refrigerator here soon when it comes to cybersecurity? And do you think that that's something that business products like yours will focus on in the next 3 to 5 years? Because I suspect that some offices will spend the extra money on a nicer fridge. So, I feel like this type of equipment is going to eventually leak into the office space.
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball. Maybe the guys that maybe Mike Judge that produced Silicon Valley did. I think over 10 years ago in that show, there was a incident where Huli was operated or sustained off smart fridges. I just got
forgot all about that.
I just got a new dishwasher this week, which is network connected.
Oh my goodness.
So those are the types of things that are going to come into corporate office environments. They'll come into, our home spaces where we have folks telecommuting. So yeah, I mean, I think those are possible areas of compromise that, if you think about that smart refrigerator, it's pretty powerful. It's probably a pretty powerful Android tablet. And it's capable of doing a lot of things if it's actually compromised. So I'm not going to predict doomsday, but it absolutely could be a factor of something. It was an example why NDRs are going to become important, because you're not going to actually typically have any sort of agent protection on a smart refrigerator.
Yeah, and to clarify, I didn't want you to predict doomsday.
Yeah.
We already know when that's happening.
Oh, we do.
No, I just wonder, like, obviously you only have to worry about integrations with other cybersecurity tools, right? So I guess maybe what I'm asking is, are there any cybersecurity platforms out there that specialize in like IoT devices and that type of thing? And have you guys looked at integrating with them if you're not already?
I mean, we do have customers where we're dealing with IoT and industrial control systems, OT,
Or even security cameras and that type of thing.
Yeah, no, we have never been asked to do, a direct integration with those products. We're not opposed to it. Again, I mentioned I was talking to a customer on Wednesday that didn't use Teams. They used Slack, and they wanted to have a similar integration as Teams. I brought it to the team internally, and they surprised me and released it today. So I think the key message there is we're driven by the customers we serve. So if MSPs need a particular integration, we want to include it on our roadmap, especially if it's something that's really, really, we're hearing a lot and it's becoming popular. An example might be SASE firewalls are becoming more common. We're just getting ready to hopefully begin doing some integrations with them, but there are so many. How do you choose which ones to integrate with? I think it's driven by customer need.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Well, gentlemen, thank you for coming on here and giving us this demo. I really think you guys did a bang up job. So congratulations on not only a smooth demo, but a really nice looking product.
Thank you, Steve. Thanks for having us. And man, I hope your move goes well tomorrow. I know how painful that can be.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully we've got a lot of friends and family who are going to help us, and yeah, that's what I literally, as soon as we're done here, that's what I get to go start doing. So, you guys want to talk more?
Yeah, happy Friday! Happy Friday!
All right, take care, everybody.
You
I
guys.
hope you all enjoy the weekend, and I will see you guys next on Tuesday. That's the plan. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.